Living and dying are not two separate things, and they're intertwined, living and dying, with love, with compassion. Because what dies, or what needs to die, according to Krishnamurti and really most of the world's sages, as you know, is the me. And when the me disappears, there is love, and there is timelessness. There is that sense of the immeasurable that he talked about. So much of what he said specifically about living and dying, because you really can't separate anything that he said. I mean, the art of learning, of listening, of seeing is intertwined with living and dying, and understanding authority and fear and relationship. All of it it's all one being. But he did speak specifically about living and dying as in relationship to the conditioned mind in particular. And what he said was pretty simple. I think, there's so much simplicity in Krishnamurti, even though it seems complicated or it seems sometimes like a Zen koan. It is, in my way of looking at it, simple, but also because it's so simple, it can feel elusive. It can feel dense in its own way. So today, the simplicity of it really is what has to die so that we can live. He said, to die is to have a mind that is completely empty of itself, empty of its daily longing, pleasure, and agonies. Death is a renewal, a mutation, in which thought does not function at all, because thought is old. When there is death, there is something totally new. Freedom from the known is death, and then you are living. So I guess this is pretty self-explanatory. He spoke of the walking dead. And we're all like that at times, where we are simply lost in our thoughts, totally asleep, in the hypnosis of life, and that is not living. We think that living is always in the present and that dying is something that awaits us at a distant time. But we have never questioned whether this battle of everyday life is living at all. Well, I think many of us have questioned, and that's why we're here. And that's why we read Krishnamurti and others. But in getting caught up in the day-to-day activities of life, there is a forgetfulness about the now, the present moment, the timeless moment. We have accepted life as it is with all its agony and despair and have got used to it, and think of death as something to be carefully avoided. But death is extraordinarily like life when we know how to live. You cannot live without dying. You cannot live if you do not die psychologically every minute. This is not an intellectual paradox. To live completely, wholly, every day, as if it were a new loveliness. There must be dying to everything of yesterday, otherwise you live mechanically. And a mechanical mind can never know what love is or what freedom is. So this is the predicament. This is what the challenge of truly living comes down to. He says, for centuries, we have been conditioned by nationality, class, caste, tradition, religion, language, education, literature, art, custom, convention, propaganda of all kinds, economic pressure, the food we eat, the climate we live in, our family, our friends, our experiences, every influence you can think of. And therefore, our responses to every problem are conditioned. Now, forgive me, but I brought back my little computer that I started with early in the year because I think this so encapsulates the programming that is between our ears, and it's very much like a hard drive. So there are folders, right, on your computer, and you have them all named. I have mine all named. And inside those folders are things that you have saved. It's exactly the same thing with the brain. There's a folder in my brain and in yours of everything that has ever happened to you and some things that have never happened to you. Things you've experienced. Things with your husband, your wife, your life partner, your family, your boss, images and memories of the past, the fears you may have for the future, etc., etc. And I added the ones on the side that I had just read from Krishnamurti's insight. So there's an awful lot that we are responding from when we encounter another human being or we encounter some problem in life. We are responding from all of this most of the time. And of course, billions of people all over the planet are stuck inside the same conditioning. We're all reacting from this, from what we think, we know, or believe. And I'm going to quote myself just once today because it is related to what Krishnamurti just said. Thought belief causes enormous division in the world. It breaks apart families, marriages, and friendships. It starts wars. Many people are so strongly attached to their beliefs, they unknowingly identify themselves as their beliefs. The result is polarization throughout the world. Millions of people are absolutely convinced that their inner commentary about others, themselves, and their specific worldview is justified and correct. And so it's no surprise that the world is fractured by a tenacious attachment to economic, religious, and cultural beliefs that are held to be true even though others are harmed or even killed by such beliefs. I have an image here of Tibetan monks creating one of their wonderful artworks, you know, these mandalas made of sand. And this is a you could say a practice of theirs to spend days, if not weeks, creating this beautiful piece of art, which is temporary, just like we are. And soon after it's finished, they brush it all away. It's all gone. And I have witnessed something like this, and it is an astonishing thing to see such beautiful artwork disappear. And it is an intention at the bottom of this to not have the attachment or the identification with something they spent so many, many hours creating. And this is, this letting go, this dying to the known, as Krishnamurti put it, is actually in many of the traditions, and Tibetan Buddhism is one of them. This is an image of Yeshe Shogel, who is the mother of Tibetan Buddhism. Her and Padmasambhava is considered, the father of Tibetan Buddhism, but he did not speak Tibetan when he came from India. And Yeshe played a big role in Tibet with the establishment of Buddhism. So in this piece of artwork on the lower left screen, she's holding a kapala or a skull cap. Tibetan art and Indian art, has these marvelous visual symbols that depict the inner world, as it were. So the skull cap is a reminder of our impermanence, that we're going to die. And it is also simultaneously represents the elixir of the deathless realm. And the deathless realm is now. It's not necessarily when you die. It's now. So I really like this particular image quite a lot. And then in the other traditions, in Sufism, Zen, Christianity, there is this common statement, and really no one can figure out who it belongs to because it's embedded in all three. And this is written on the wall in St. Paul's Monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. If you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. I'll let you ponder a little bit. And this from Brother David Stendhal-Rast, who is a Benedictine monk. And there is a practice they have, the monks and the nuns, that came from Saint Benedict, and it's called memento mori, meaning the basic approaches to the daily life of the monastery is to have death at all times before one's eyes. And he says, it challenged me to incorporate the awareness of death into my daily living. It isn't primarily a practice of thinking of one's last hour or of death as a physical phenomenon. It is a seeing of every moment of life against the horizon of death, and a challenge to incorporate that awareness of dying into every moment so as to become fully alive. A moment just to rest the mind, relax the body, get in touch with the body, sensation of your feet on the floor, your hand in your lap. Take a breath. To understand the beauty and the extraordinary nature of death, there must be freedom from the known. Dying to the known is the beginning of the understanding of death, because then the mind is made fresh, new, and there is no fear. Therefore, one can enter into that state called death. So from the beginning to the end, life and death are one. So, a question: what stands in our way of this living and dying as a simultaneous experience? One of the ways Krishnamurti answers that, it's linked to the centuries of conditioning that we're each heirs to. He says the brain cells have created a pattern, and those brain cells refuse to create another pattern, which may be uncertain. And so the movement from certainty to uncertainty is what I call fear, he says. He also said, fear is what makes us accept our conditioning. And so the way I look at this, these patterns are very deeply baked in. And this is why, one reason, it's such a long process for us to gradually break through and see the depth of our own conditioning and the fear that lies beneath it. He says, we have separated living from dying, and the interval between the living and the dying is fear. I think that interval is time. We live in the field of time, and that's where there is fear. He says, we are afraid of death, and we invent all kinds of theories, hopes, beliefs to disguise the fact of death. But the fact is still there. To understand a fact, we must look at it, not run away from it. Most of us are afraid of living as well as afraid of dying. So that's something to ask yourself. Are you afraid of living? Why is there a fear of death? He says, when we cling to continuity, and that is the me, there is the fear of death. Fear comes into being when this continuity is threatened through death. We want to know the truth about reincarnation. We want proof of the survival of the soul. We listen to the assertion of clairvoyance and to the conclusions of psychical research. But we never ask how to live with delight, with enchantment, with beauty every day. So again, we're turned back into ourselves instead of reaching for something that feels safe and that is some kind of a continuance of me, of my existence. I brought in this very brief exchange between Krishnamurti and a questioner. And the questioner, can the me end without the effort of me? Krishnamurti. The effort to become something is the response, the action of conditioning. Questioner. How can the action of the me stop? Krishnamurti. It can stop only if you see this whole thing, the whole business of it. If you see it in action, which is in relationship, the seeing is the ending of the me. Not only is this seeing an action which is not conditioned, but it also acts upon the conditioning. So once again, seeing is the key to seeing how I am in relationship with others. And of course, in order to see myself in relationship to others, to see what's happening inside me, to see the whole situation, there has to be enough quietude in the mind to be able to see. But what is really interesting here, at least to me, is that the seeing itself is not conditioned because it's coming from a quiet space in the mind, but the seeing acts on the conditioning. And that is why the more we see, as it were. And that is why the more we see, the more quiet the mind can be, and the less intense our responses to stimuli that normally drive us in one direction or another. The clarity of perception will act all the time in living. That is living like the eagle in the sky. That is living beauty and living love. So once again, the seeing of my own conditioning, seeing the fear I may have of dying in the moment, as well as the end of me physically. But this psychological dying also is comprised of a lot of fear. But in seeing that is where we begin to live. So he asks, is it possible while living to die? Which means coming to an end, being as nothing. Is it possible while living in this world where everything is becoming more and more, or becoming less and less, where everything is a process of climbing, achieving, succeeding, is it possible in such a world to know death? To find out actually what takes place when you die, you must die. This isn't a joke. You must die, not physically, but psychologically, inwardly. Die to the things you have cherished and to the things you are bitter about. If you have died to one of your pleasures, the smallest or the greatest, naturally, without any enforcement or argument, then you will know what it means to die. A living mind is a still mind. A living mind is a mind that has no center and therefore no space and time. such a mind is limitless. Because the me is no longer there in that stillness. Freedom is the absolute good, and its action is the beauty of everyday life. In this freedom alone there is living, and without it, how can there be love? Everything exists and has its being in this freedom. It is everywhere and nowhere. It has no frontiers. Can you die now to everything you know and not wait for tomorrow to die? This freedom is eternity and ecstasy and love. So I put this interval here with that question, can I die now, not tomorrow? Can I, just for a few seconds, die to my thinking mind? Can I be here now in this chair, aware of my body, surroundings, thoughts as they drift in and drift out, with that gap of silence that arises between those thoughts? Can I just die to what's inside my head and relax and savor the quietude? What you are matters enormously, for you are the world and the world is you. And of course, what I am is determined by how quiet I am, by how I react or do not react to my conditioning. And so the content of my consciousness is related to the content of the whole of human consciousness. And that's why each one of us matters. He says enormously. It's not a small thing to work on oneself. It's not a small thing at all to practice listening, to dying to the known. Ramana Maharshi put it this way: your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render to the world. I think it's important to bring these things in because we tend to sometimes throw up our hands and say, what does it matter? But it does matter greatly who you are. So Krishnamurti sums it up this way. So the first thing to realize, this is the first thing to realize, that it is absolutely essential to know yourself. You may be very erudite and have a big position, but that is all nonsense as long as you do not know yourself, because you will be walking in darkness. To understand yourself, there must be an awareness, a watchfulness, a state of observation in which there is not a trace of condemnation or justification. And to be in that state of observation without judging is an extraordinarily arduous task, because the weight of tradition is against you. Your mind has been trained for centuries to judge, to condemn, to justify, to evaluate, to accept or deny. So when we understand that, we can be much more compassionate with ourselves and others. This is our shared condition. Don't say, how am I to get rid of this conditioning? But see the truth that if you want to understand yourself, which is obviously of the highest importance, you must observe the operation of your own mind without any condemnation or comparison. If you are aware, deeply attentive, conscious of your own thoughts and feelings, if you are not interpreting what the speaker is saying, but actually observing yourself as he describes and goes into the problem, then you will live. Live not only with exaltation, but also with death and with love. It's a new way of saying something, I think, that we live more deeply when we're aware of our own thoughts and feelings. And of course, I couldn't not say what I love so much in this insight of Krishnamurti's, because for me, it sums up everything. When I understand myself, I understand you. And out of that understanding comes love. And out of that understanding is life and death. It's all entwined together. The old me dies when I truly understand myself. Now, if a few of us see this together, and it is not mine or yours, but it is so, then we create a new generation. You understand?